Hi, this is Larissa Coe. We are going to be looking at some more art history movements from Fauvism through pop art. So in Fauvism, you start to see really bright colors. This was kind of started in Impressionism. In that time, the painters would experiment with some uh, bigger brush strokes, less realism, and some brighter colors that the eye was meant to mix while looking at it. In Fauvism, they kind of took that idea but changed the meaning. So instead of trying to capture the effects of light, in this case, they were trying to use color in a way that would express emotions that they were feeling as they viewed the subject. So, for example, in this famous painting by Henri Matisse, the man painted his wife, and it certainly doesn't look realistic, but to him that captured the essence of what he was seeing and the feeling of it. The term Fauvism comes from actually a critic who saw these kind of paintings next to some more traditional classical style paintings and thought that it looked like a wild beast had created them. And they, rather than getting upset, took the name and ran with it. They became the Fauvists. Henri Matisse and André Derain were the two biggest Fauvists, and they actually traveled together. They're both French men. They traveled together and created paintings in this style for a time with each other. This one is another really famous one by André Derain called Charing Cross Bridge, London. In this case, they were trying to give London a more appealing appearance, and he's trying to make it look a lot more exciting. And you can't argue that these colors are not exciting. At the same time, over in Germany and Austria, a similar thing was happening. So these artists also wanted to experiment with expressing emotion through artwork. During this time, photography was becoming more widely available to just everyday people. And so the role of the artist and art in the world was changing. It wasn't necessary anymore for artists to capture the way people look or to kind of hold history and time through images. They were experimenting with other purposes that art could have. And in this case, these German and Austrians also agreed that art could be used to express emotion. We can see that they distorted subjects in order to achieve their purpose. So, for example, in this one over here, it doesn't look accurate, but it kind of gives you a feeling. These artists were inspired by Edvard Munch's with the Scream, which is a very famous painting that you may have seen before, which was painted in 1893. So this all was happening when some serious changes were happening in Germany. We can see that Expressionism here looks different than it does in the other places. After the World War, they started using Expressionism in order to critique political figures and kind of expose people for who they are, in addition to expressing other kinds of emotions. Some of the biggest expressionist painters were Franz Marc, we see two of his here, Ernst Ludwig Kirchner. In 1933, when Hitler came into power, this art was actually censored from Germany. At that time, a lot of artists were exiled or kind of went into hiding, and whatever the case, it was brought to an end in Germany. Cubism was an art movement that took place from 1905 to 1920, so this overlaps with the other two, although it's a shorter movement. And this happened around the time of World War I. There was a lot changing in the world. Cubism also shows a big change in art. And the idea of Cubism is to show different angles or parts of an image in one painting. So again, photography was art's competitor. And this is another way that artists branched off to try to make it into something different. So rather than just showing something from the front, they would try to show the front, side, back, all together in one painting. You can see these geometric shapes and planes showing up in all of these artists' paintings, and even in sculpture as well. Georges Braque was a huge Cubist painter, but the most famous artist who did some Cubism was Pablo Picasso. He was born to a painter. His father was a painter, and he began selling paintings at the age of 8. It's pretty interesting to see a whole lifetime of styles that he went through. So at the age of 15, he created Science and Charity. This one was probably heavily influenced by his father, who was more of a classical painter. Then he went through what is called the Blue Period. At age 22, he painted The Old Guitarist. This one was called the Rose Period. At age 24, he painted this one. It's a pretty stark difference in color to the Blue Period and kind of the feeling as well. Next is the Three Women. Pablo Picasso was inspired by African masks that he saw, and you can kind of see the influence of that in a few of his paintings. But this one was kind of the start of the Cubist phase, and then this one is full-on Cubism right here. He painted this at age 29. Then he moved on. He went on a trip to Italy and moved into more of a neoclassical style that we see here. And then this is his most famous painting. It's called Guernica. This does not fall into Cubism, but instead is considered a surrealist artwork. It's very large, and it's trying to capture the horrors of war. The Spanish Civil War was going on, and this is his reaction to that. And after that, he moved on to sculpture. At the age of 86, he donated this huge 50-foot high sculpture to the people in Chicago. Next up is Dadaism and Surrealism from 1917 to 1950. So Dada art is a little bit difficult to explain because it is anti-art art. It's art that makes fun of art. It's nonsensical, it's random, and the only rule was no rules. Dadaism was a belief system that was followed by writers as well. Writers that would cut up words and then pull them out randomly, put them together, and call it a poem. The artists would use a lot of found objects. They did some collages, as you see here with Hannah Hook's Cut the Kitchen Knife Through the Last Epoch of Webinar Beer Belly Culture in Germany. And perhaps the most controversial was Marcel Duchamp's fountain. It was a urinal. He wrote R. Mutt on it and put it up in an art gallery and called it art. These artists were very rebellious against kind of the traditional style of art, and were really just trying to push the boundaries of what art was and kind of make fun of it at the same time. At the time World War I was going on, there was a lot of chaos in the world, a lot of distrust, and people, at least these Dadists, were kind of escaping reality on one end and capturing the chaos on the other end through this Dada art. Nobody knows where the term came from, but that's what they called themselves. Next up is Surrealism. This may be one of my favorite types of art. So again, this is during World War I. The Great Depression occurred, and then World War II. These artists were fed up with the way people were acting in the real world, while apparently supposedly thinking rationally. All of these crazy, awful things were happening. So let's just throw that out the window, and instead of being rational, let's go back to the surreal. They were very experimental, and they had this big thing where they would try to recreate dreams that they had. They wanted to kind of bring out their subconscious into their art. One way they did that, other than the dream-based paintings, was called automatism, in which they would just kind of let the pen go and flow from their minds. And this was meant to kind of represent their subconscious. They also would make some strange combinations. So this is a painting of a pipe, and it says this is not a pipe underneath it. This was Rene Magritte. You can see three other of Rene Magritte's paintings here. So this one is called The Human Condition. We have a window and then a canvas in front of it that is painted with what we assume is seen behind the canvas, but we'll never know. So it's kind of an interesting way to think about reality. We have lovers right here, and then this one is called The Pleasure Principle, also by Rene Magritte. And Salvador Dali was the other really famous surrealist artist. We have his lobster telephone right here, and he was quite a figure in his time. In the 1940s and 50s, we have abstract expressionism. They want to make art extremely personal. So kind of like, this is completely my essence or me or my feelings on the page. And they threw out representing anything. It's not showing things. Jackson Pollock is the most famous abstract expressionist, and he would take huge canvases, lay them on the ground, and then throw paint on them, or splatter it, or whatever he chose to do. And he felt that doing so really represented himself on the page, because it was his movements, his kind of non-thinking creation that led to these things. Next up is minimalism, which occurred in the 1960s. Minimalism was a reaction to abstract expressionism. While that art was all about putting the painter on the page and showing emotions and creating one-of-a-kind pieces that were really meaningful to the painter and hopefully the viewer, the idea of minimalism was that art doesn't have to elicit emotion, it doesn't have to mean anything, it can just be what it is. They use the phrase specific objects in real space. So it's taking all the emotion out of it, all of the meaning out of it. A lot of times they would take the personal touches out of it. They would use machine-made things and put them together instead of trying to put their personal touch to it. We see a lot of repetition, and again, no focal point. And they're just trying to show materials as what they are. So down here, Frank Stella, instead of trying to create a masterpiece that represents a story or draws out an emotion, he would say, this is a canvas with paint on it. This is a bunch of mirrors. This is some squares on a floor. They weren't trying to make art mean anything. It just was what it was. This is another of Frank Stella's paintings. He was a big, famous painter, another American. This one is called The Marriage of Reason and Squalor 2. And although it's really simple, it also takes a lot of effort. Trying to paint really straight lines on a canvas with just a large paintbrush isn't easy. But the goal wasn't to try to get an emotion out of you for it or to try to make you think of what it means. It just was to be paint on a canvas. Also in the 60s, we have pop art. Pop art is based on advertisements and comic strips and cartoons. It usually includes some text and some line art, and we see these ones specifically, that are done with what's called Ben-Day dots, which are kind of replicating the dots that we would see in comic books. And it's kind of trying to show the experience of America. So Andy Warhol's Campbell's soup cans. The story behind these is that he used to eat Campbell's soup every day, and he kind of wanted to show the repetition and the similarity of that experience. He would use prints So kind of like a text is printed onto a t-shirt, he would create his own prints and print onto these canvases, and then this was his artwork right here. You can see that he also did a similar thing with Marilyn Monroe, and Roy Lichtenstein was the other huge pop artist who created these. He actually would take comic strips and recreate the artwork on larger canvases. Eduardo Paolozzi was one of the first who created what is now considered pop art, and we can see he used the word pop here, and that is where it got its name. These are some of the resources. A lot of the images are public domain. The others came from these websites, and there are links in the presentation as well. If you want to go back through and get some more information about these artists, go ahead and feel free to do that. Thanks for watching.